Hello, and welcome to
Farm Buds, compounding professional narratives with student perspectives.
I'm Sierra.
And I'm Liz.
Today we are joined by Dr. Krystal Moorman-Bishir, an associate clinical professor at the University of Utah College of Pharmacy.
Hello, Dr. Bishir. So our first question today is, why did you pursue a career in pharmacy?
So I actually kind of fell into pharmacy. My initial plan was to be a veterinarian, and I was pre-vet. I was pre-vet, and I worked for a vet in a very rural area. And I'm not going to go into the traumatic experience I had there, but there was an experience I had while working there that made me decide that was not the appropriate career path for me. And I went to my advisor's office, who was my chemistry professor at the time, and kind of had a little crisis. Like, I don't know what I'm going to do. I always thought I'd do something in healthcare. I don't like to touch people. I can't be a nurse or a doctor, essentially was the conversation. And he said, well, have you ever thought about a career in pharmacy? And I'm like, no, I haven't. And so I got a job in a pharmacy and started shadowing people who did different things in pharmacy. And I just decided that was the right path for me. Yeah.
So I guess touching animals was very different than touching humans.
But she still doesn't touch humans.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
No, I'm just kidding.
It's sort of like, I have children, and I changed their diapers, and I've cleaned up all kinds of messes.
Yeah.
But I don't want to do that for anyone else's children.
Yeah. Right.
And it's kind of like, I don't know, there's something about animal mess that to me was less problematic. Not very many zoonoses, really, right?
Oh.
Much more likely to get sick from a person.
For sure.
That's a good point.
That is a really good point.
Yeah.
Who would have thought?
Well, and that really resonates with me. That's part of the reason why I'm here. I don't want to touch people either.
Yeah, see? I feel like that's a common story that people need to hear, that it's okay. There's a place for you in healthcare, even if you don't particularly like to be close, if you have a bubble.
This is true. I don't have any bubbles. Come here.
I know you don't.
I've been told I have a very large personal space.
Okay. Well, so out of the zoo and into the School of Pharmacy, where did you go to pharmacy school?
I went to pharmacy school at the Medical University of South Carolina in Charleston.
Oh.
Yeah.
That's fun.
It's a great place.
And it's humid there, isn't it?
It is humid there.
Oh, thank you.
It's like there's the beach, there's water. It's beautiful. Loved it there.
So how do you find yourself in Utah then?
So when I was a student, the person who taught drug information for me was Nanette Berenson, who is now, I think her title is Associate Vice President of Shared Clinical Services at Intermountain Healthcare. I might have gotten that wrong, but she was a pharmacist. She was on faculty, and I fell into drug information partially because of that class, and I did a residency with her. She's originally from Utah. And in my last year of residency, she came back to be the director of pharmacy to open Intermountain Medical Center. And she recruited me for a job in pulmonary hypertension clinic the year after I finished my residency. And that's how I ended up here.
Oh, that's pretty interesting. Okay. Well, woof. That's crazy, though. So she just said, hey, you want to come to Utah and work with me?
She said, I need a clinical pharmacist in pulmonary hypertension. And I said, Nanette, I don't know anything about pulmonary hypertension. And she said, Krystal, nobody knows anything about pulmonary hypertension. Greg Elliott knows everything about that. He needs you for the other things. Yeah. And so, I came and I interviewed, and I really loved the team, and I really liked Dr. Elliott, and that was a fit. And so I came out.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that.
And that seems to be a really common story, because as we move in pharmacy school, we're being trained as generalists.
Right.
And then all of a sudden, I guess at some point in your career, you just specialize.
Yes, but, so Jean Nappy is a pharmacist who was, she's very well known. She's retired now, I think, fully, but maybe she still has a little bit of hand in some things. But, her practice philosophy was very much, cardiology was her specialty. But her practice philosophy was like pharmacists need to be generalists. Like you on a cardiology team, your main contribution isn't necessarily the cardiology drugs, or, like you're not diagnosing. Your job is to see the whole picture and the whole patient. Mm-hmm. And so I kind of subscribe to that practice philosophy where it's like, even if you're a specialist, you're a generalist, because you're the only one on a super specialized team that probably knows anything about the primary care drugs. And so my role on that pulmonary hypertension team was more therapeutic drug monitoring. So I managed warfarin for those patients. And I also managed like all of the LFT monitoring for the drugs that required that. But I also did medication reconciliations, and I was looking out for how are the interventions we're making as a team going to impact all the other things this patient is taking in their other disease states. And so some people definitely get very specialized, but I think most pharmacists still have that lens of like looking at the whole picture and being willing to kind of make recommendations for some things that maybe other people aren't thinking about because they might be looking more at a particular disease state.
Do you ever feel like that is sometimes lost, though, where a pharmacist, maybe starts in that general, in the general of pharmacy, and then becomes or kind of finds this niche I should say. But do you ever find them that they're just so stuck into it that I don't want to say that they're not actively learning, because maybe they're still learning within that niche, but they fall out of the other areas. And what impact does that have or create for them?
Well, I mean, I'm sure that happens.
Mm-hmm.
The people who I know mostly, I mean, I know a lot of great pharmacists, and I would say, they may not be, like, they're not going to manage your diabetes and be like, you know what, I can totally adjust your insulin, but they are up to date enough mm-hmm. in kind of a broad range of areas that they know what's at least happening.
Okay.
And
mm-hmm.
I mean, that's one of the benefits of doing something like board certification, where, you have to have so many hours of CE that there's no way you could get them all in a tiny niche. Like, you have to mm-hmm. be a generalist to some extent. Mm-hmm. And, even I haven't done board certification for the specialties like peds but even within that, I know that there's a lot of thought put into what CE would be useful or appropriate. And so I think they still get enough of what they need, because they don't need to be specialist level in everything. No one's an expert at everything. So really, you want to be an expert in that field, but kind of still in your periphery, be able to see that whole picture.
Got it. That makes sense.
And just be thinking like a pharmacist, right? Because that never goes away. Even if you're like, man, I don't know anything about this drug, you know how to check for an interaction with it, and you know how to look up information and figure out if that's going to be a problem. Yeah.
Okay.
I guess we will move right along to, what does a day in your professional life look like?
Wow. It can look very different. So I kind of wear several hats, and, everything, it's not like I teach today and tomorrow I'm going to do experiential education. It all kind of gets thrown in the mix, right? So I may spend the morning working with my staff in experiential education and kind of planning out whatever we're working on there, responding to emails that have to do with that. I might have to address concerns that come up on rotations. Like, that doesn't get scheduled or planned. It just kind of pops up when it pops up. Might have a student who is in crisis or has illness, or, there's all kinds of things that have to be worked around. And then you just kind of fit that in. And I don't know that I have a typical day, I guess is what I would say. It's like I kind of have a job to do, and I have responsibilities on kind of the faculty side, and I have responsibilities on the experiential education side, and that all becomes like one big job that you just juggle and manage and prioritize all the pieces so that it all gets done. Mm-hmm. And I don't know that I can tell you how that happens some days, but it does.
I get that. I get that. It's called parenthood.
It's kind of like, it's just life is like that, right? You've got a million things on your plate, and it just kind of, just do it.
So for those listening, what is experiential education?
Yeah, so experiential education in pharmacy is that hands-on component. So we have didactic education where students spend, about 3 years in the classroom learning principles and foundational knowledge. And then they have introductory pharmacy practice experiences and advanced pharmacy practice experiences that comprise about 40% of the curriculum. And that's all kind of in a practice environment, learning by doing, learning by observing in some cases initially, but hands-on patient care, hands-on work in pharmacy with a licensed pharmacist.
That's pretty cool. That seems like it's a lot, though, to manage like practice sites and then, individuals to help manage that and then ensure that students have access. And that sounds crazy.
Well, I think that's like why you have a really good team, right?
Yeah.
So, my job is kind of to make sure all the cylinders are clicking, that we're meeting ACPE standards, and to hire and train the staff appropriately. But a lot of the day-to-day function happens completely outside of my work. It's become kind of a well-oiled machine where the staff know how to, get students signed up and their paperwork completed and what they're looking for in terms of health requirements and how to read a background check. And so I really only get pulled in to process variations, right? Mm-hmm. Like, this is not something that's typical now. What do we do? Mm-hmm. And then more of the strategic planning and the academic side of experiential education. So, writing evaluations, any kind of issues with performance or, students who may be struggling, that kind of stuff falls to me. But the day-to-day functioning is managed by a manager, and that's kind of my right-hand person, and they manage the other two staff members. So, it works.
It works. Yeah.
Did COVID-19 make it difficult to be placing students?
Oh, like when they kicked them out of all the practice sites, you mean?
Yes, exactly.
That's what I was alluding to.
Yes, that was
no.
That was really actually quite easy to navigate. No, I'm kidding. So, one thing I will say, and this is not unique to the U, we had to be very creative in getting people graduated on time. And, one advantage we do have here is we have more hours in experiential education than are required by the standards or by the Practice Act law, actually. And so for a lot of students, they were just done. They didn't do their last block. And that, some people were happy about that and some people were really unhappy about that. ACPE was also really flexible about, poison control counted as ambulatory care. And so there were a lot of things done that were definitely not what we would traditionally do, or even maybe what we would ideally do. But we managed to graduate that whole class on time, despite, having a long time where students were not allowed in a practice facility. Our preceptors were very adaptable, and quite frankly, honestly, a heroic effort, because, they are dealing with crisis standards of care in their own facilities, but also figuring out how to do distance learning for an experiential site. So it took a lot of people, and there were many, many meetings between, it was like with me and the administration at University of Utah Health, our administration at the college, to like put our heads together and creatively get on the same page about how do we get these students out on time. So, I'm really proud of that work. It was very collaborative, and I think it was very creative. And then, as 2020 progressed and then a whole new class came in, I think we just got better and better at figuring out distance, and healthcare moved to a lot of remote patient care as well, right? So there's pharmacists who still haven't gone back to on-site work because they weren't necessarily, they didn't need to be there to do their work. And at the time, we were trying to keep bodies out of hospitals to, keep everyone as healthy as possible. So I think just we've learned new ways of doing things that, we may continue to do that way well past the pandemic. But yeah, it was definitely challenging and stressful in the moment. Like it was very stressful in the moment to wonder if you were going to be able to pull that off.
The heist.
Yeah.
With a heist. So then I have to ask then, how do you balance academia and then a clinical practice? How do you do that? If all of this is taking on, and you do have a well-oiled machine, but how do you balance those two?
Well, I think this is like true for work-life balance too. Like the idea that like you will be spending equal amounts of time on everything at any given moment is just not accurate. And so I think it's the important thing for me is like keeping the big picture of all the things that I'm required to do. And it's a lot of time management, right? It's figuring out how long does it take to do a certain task, streamlining where you can, collaborating where you can, so that, over the years, I've really tried to figure out how to maximize my time in any one area. So I may not update my slides every year, right?
Mm-hmm.
If nothing's changed, it's like there are times where I'm like, this is good enough today. And I think figuring out where that works and where it's like, you know what, this has to be updated now, or I have to spend time doing X, Y, or Z. And so it's always a manage of juggling priorities and being flexible with what gets to take precedent today. Like if a student is going to fail a rotation, for example, like everything else kind of gets put to the side for that day. And, we're navigating with preceptor and student, and there might be multiple meetings involved, and there's planning for remediation and how is there a way that we can get this student where they need to be. So it's also fighting my instincts to procrastinate, which I really love to do, but knowing, if I do that, something's going to come up and work's not going to get done. So like when I teach in the fall, that class, all the assignments are uploaded and keyed and ready to go on like by the beginning of August, so that the class just runs. And if, I don't have to be like, oh my gosh, somebody had an issue on Wednesday morning and now I don't have lecture slides. So I think it's just planning ahead for things that could take you off course so that you don't end up you don't want to drop balls, right?
Yeah. That makes sense.
What achievement in your career are you the most proud of?
Well, I would say the services that I've built. And some are still running and some look a lot different than they used to look. But, I started a pulmonary hypertension service at Intermountain Medical Center, which continued for a time. I started a drug information and medication safety service there, which ended up ultimately, they rehired more of a med safety focused person, and then that person's kind of merged into corporate. But that's, I laid a lot of that foundational work, and I actually trained that person as a student. She did my rotation. So, and then South Jordan Health Center, McKay and I, started that service, and Eve, who's there now, was one of our residents who we trained. So it's kind of, in this service, I think I'm the most proud of because, we've come a long way in experiential education in terms of staffing. When I started, it was me and a part-time FTE. And I think one thing I struggled with earlier in my career, I think, was getting resources and getting people to like acknowledge that I needed more help. And so I think the fact that I've now built this to a team of 3 full-time people and another part-time person, I'm really proud of that because I think I've been able to establish like what I could accomplish with that extra staff and really been better at telling my story and what I'm doing to administration to get buy-in for that. And so, and I'm really proud of the quality of experience that we offer students here. I don't think there's another college of pharmacy that does a better job with the quality of rotations and the variety of rotations available for their students.
Ooh,
I mean, people can write into me
in for some fun.
But no, I mean, I would
like
put
that.
us up there with anyone in terms of and how individualized we try to make things for students and the things that we do to help them achieve their own unique goals. I think, that's something I'm really proud of.
That's awesome.
You hit on something that was so foundational for us when we started this podcast. And I think that can really be summed up by asking, why is it important for pharmacists to tell their stories?
Yeah, well, I mean, we hear about burnout all the time, right? And we hear about people leaving the profession and people leaving other health professions. And I think a big part of that has to do with just overwhelm, right? There's just too much work. There's not enough time. And you can say people aren't prioritizing correctly. I don't believe that. I think people are really under-resourced in a lot of places. And, in any organization, there's only so much to go around. And so getting a piece of the pie can be really challenging. And so I think it's not just telling your story, it's telling your story and aligning that with what matters for the organization. Because you can have a great story. And I think this is where I struggled initially, is like I had kind of my own mission for my service. And it's like, and it did align, but not being able to really connect it in a way of like, this is what I will do for the organization. This is how this connects to our mission as a whole. And I think if you can do that, you do end up with resources. And that's night and day in terms of like how you feel at work, and, being overwhelmed for long periods of time, that leads to burnout, and it leads to people leaving when they probably could stay. So I think, and they might want to stay. I think most people, when they leave, it's not, people say you leave your boss, not your employer, or not the job. But I think sometimes it's a combination, and but I think a lot of people want to find a way to stay, and they try to, but communicating to the people who can make decisions that matter for you, what would help you stay, and them being bought into that is really important.
I agree. But then how can we train or coach or learn to, because you can always have a big idea and you can have those things, but what is it that prevents us from getting that second half of saying the why behind what we want to do? Because we can scream. It's like almost like what I always say, you can be the loudest person in the room, but you're not making any sense, right?
Yeah.
So how can you be the loudest person in the room and also make sense? Because I feel like that's sometimes very hard to do, right?
Well, and I will say, I think what helped me over the years was like paying attention. I ended up in a leadership position pretty early in my career, and like paying attention to what are they talking about? What is the focus here? And I think you need a mentor. Like you have to have multiple mentors, probably. I know I have, but who can you can pull aside and be like, this is what I'm trying to do. And, it helps if they're in your organization and they know how your organization functions. I think, and, there's going to be times where you find yourself somewhere that you really just need to go because you don't align, or, you can't integrate. I think you have to have a mentor who you can be vulnerable with to some degree and be honest about like, this is what is stressing me out, or this is what I need in order to function at the level I know I'm capable of, and have someone who hears that and is also creative in helping you kind of come along when you're young to solve those problems, and someone who will be honest with you about, maybe the things you're doing that are not working in your favor. Because, there's this thing called the Johari window where it's like, here's the part of you that everybody sees. You see it, everybody sees it. There's the part of you that's like your inner world that you see and nobody sees. There's a part of you that you don't see and everyone else does. And then there's that part that is unknown to you and everyone, which is the scary part.
Right.
But I think like having honest people who see what you don't see, who are safe to tell you that and do it in a constructive and loving and positive way, as opposed to like, making you feel like you're not good enough because you have limitations,
Yeah, I totally get that.
One of the big reasons we brought you here today is so you can answer this question. What is drug information?
Well,
what is drug info?
Drug information is honestly what pharmacists do, right? Whether they know it or not. No. Drug information is the collection or the body of knowledge about medications. It's also a service. It's a function of communicating that information to other people. So it can mean a lot of different things, but ultimately drug information is just information about medications. And, there's that process of how do you assimilate that and how do you communicate that and how do you make that specific to a certain patient.
Drug information is a black hole. That's what drug information is.
Well,
that's what it is. I have spent too many hours in drug information.
No, you haven't spent enough. That's all.
I feel like I've lived in a black hole.
I think,
so just one channel after the next. You're like, I'm just going to focus on this. And then next thing you know, you're just way over here.
You can get in the weeds. But, if you wanted to summarize it, it is the foundation or the bedrock of clinical pharmacy.
It is.
Like that's how clinical pharmacy started, was with drug information centers and then moving those drug information specialists to the floor where they could interact with the team. And, from there, everything you guys see has evolved essentially since the 1960s. So clinical pharmacy is a very young concept, relatively speaking, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So then for drug information, who or what entity or persons decides what parts of drug information are the most important?
Right. And I think that has a lot of different answers, right? Yeah. So if you are on a team and you're taking care of a specific patient, the team is what decides that, and that team includes the patient. Mm-hmm. So, taking into account, like in a given body of knowledge, what is most pertinent to that patient. When you're looking at a healthcare system, it's a team of providers and clinicians and quality and safety people, like a whole representation of all the people who make a healthcare system function, getting together to look at like what is the most safe, effective agent for a given population. And so, usually there are pharmacists who are combing the data to distill that down so the rest of the group can read it. So I would ultimately say in that case, pharmacists are deciding what's most important, but they're using knowledge of the organization, the providers they work with, the types of patients they care for to make that decision.
So we've seen that drug information is always evolving. We have new studies coming out for drugs that are FDA approved and that aren't yet. So how do we resolve and how do we integrate those new sources of information with existing sources?
Well, I think that comes down to critical literature evaluation, right? As new studies come out, part of a journal club or of actually critically evaluating an article or a study is looking at how does this fit with everything else I already know. If it's totally contradictory to everything we've ever learned, that's where, I think sometimes people not in healthcare, and maybe sometimes people in healthcare don't understand the value of reproducibility. But, sometimes, and journals will sometimes reject an article that's overlapping content, but it's like, reproducibility is part of the foundation of the scientific method, right? So sometimes it might be if you have a clinical study that it's like this flies in the face of everything we know, you may need another study before you're willing to believe that that's not just, chance that they found those results. But in general, I think we tend to make more incremental steps where this adds a little bit and it's like, well, that or this piece of literature or knowledge provides some insight into something we didn't understand before, and it makes sense and it flows and it follows. And so I think critical thinking and that kind of skill set is critical to being able to ever get forward in medicine, to be able to decide what seems to be true and something that applies to this population and should alter care versus like, let's wait and see where this goes.
So, we were former students. Let's not hide that from anybody. But, when when we took drug information our first year, our P1 year, I think a lot of us didn't really understand what drug info was in terms of what we could benefit from it.
Mm-hmm.
And then, we just get a syllabus and we look and we see these assignments that we have to do. But like in theory, the reason that we would like to introduce, incoming P1s to drug information is what? What is the primary outcome? Do you see what I did there? You feel
Nice.
that?
Are you getting ready to write a research paper?
Yeah, I am. No, but like, what is the goal, the main takeaway from, taking drug info as a P1?
Yeah, well, I would say the general gist of it is there are going to be times in your career, throughout your career, starting now up until the time you stop practicing, where you do not know the answer. Mm-hmm. But if you can find the answer, that makes you a competent provider. If your response is, I don't know, every time you don't know, you're not going to be employed very long.
Yeah.
Right? So I think, to me, that course forms the foundation for lifelong learning, mm-hmm. right? Beyond what we teach you in a curriculum. And let's be honest, I mean, I don't think there's any secret that PharmD curriculums do not comprehensively cover every area of drug therapy management and every medication and every situation you may encounter in a career. We provide foundational knowledge and a skill set for you to continue to learn. And to me, drug information is one of the most foundational skills in terms of being able to continue your learning journey beyond, these walls.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's the truth. It's also the gateway to a black hole.
Well,
they calculated how many hours I was on my Microsoft Word app, like that document.
Oh, that's
it was
rough.
insane.
I was told once by my mentor, the enemy of good is better.
Yep.
Yes.
And I think for some of us, it's harder to rein, and you're just naturally curious, right? I think if you're an intellectually curious person, the detours can be fun and interesting, and you're like, wow, I did not know that, and it has nothing to do with what I'm actually answering, but it's fascinating.
It's very fascinating.
Yeah,
also, give me something else. There's got to be another reason, right? That's always like, what's more? Yeah. It was fun, though.
You probably picked up on this when we were in your class, but she is very passionate. Like, I wish I was half as excited about all of the information that's out there as Liz is.
Yeah.
It's not the majority of students. I was the one that I was like, what are you guys talking about? This is fun. And they're all like, you're nuts. And that's see what I did with my career. That's kind of, there's a place for all of us. Whatever it is you want to do.
I've got a section somewhere. Hear me out. That's funny. No, but I really did like the class. I mean, I did spend quite a bit of time on those case studies, but I had a fun time.
Listen, I've had at least 3 students this semester tell me they've enjoyed the class, and to me, that's a win.
Yeah, that's a huge win. Although I deliberately said, I am not going to go down to that library and touch those books that everyone else is finding. I'm going to find other sources. And that took half the time.
New books.
I do. Because everyone was having the same answers. Yeah. And so it's like everyone's going to read the same stuff. And it's like, I'm going to find something different. Can I be different? Just a little bit.
Oh, you always are, Liz.
Oh, for sure. I know. I am. You're right. So, okay, I guess that another thing goes, aside from the class, and it's very important that we all have a foundation for drug information. Because I'll tell you what, when I came in as a P1, I was like, okay, great. This is like basically my undergrad. The first semester we had biochem and et cetera, et cetera. I'm like, when do we get to be pharmacists? We're all like, yeah, let's do something that's pharmacy related. And then we get to drug info and we're like, what are we doing? What's happening? But it did start to click once we find out the sources and where to look. And as I'm going into P2 and now we're doing therapeutics, it's like, oh, we're lexicomping like this with our eyes closed. We're using this. Nope, don't go there. And so I think we take it for granted that all that time in that class, because now we use it like it's the back of our hand.
Exactly.
And nobody will ever admit that. Because they're going to say,
people do admit it.
Good.
Usually as P4s.
Where are they at?
There
you go.
Yeah,
P4s,
usually as P4s, they're like,
true.
I really kind of hated that. And I tell the P1s, I'm like, this assignment continues because I continue to get feedback later in the curriculum from people that was like one of the most useful classes they had in terms of like their development and their ability to perform on rotations, which is important to me. So yeah, I think application is a higher form of learning in Bloom's taxonomy, right? And I think it is harder too.
Yeah.
It's harder to go from knowledge to application, but it's what you're going to have to do. And so I think learning to do that really young in your career is important.
I just had a hard time starting because I'm really OCD about formatting. And I was very overwhelmed with how can I get this all and be concise? Because I don't want to look at something that's 17 pages. I want it to be like 2 pages, So you're blurting out all of this stuff. And so that skill set was something that really took me a long time. Yeah. You can get all the information you want, but it's picking out what's pertinent.
Yeah.
And that is the challenge of that assignment. It's not completing it. It's just do I need to know and what do I not need to know?
Yep.
Right. And so when I finally got that down, I was like, okay, we can cruise now. But I guess in terms of now moving back to maybe application to people that work in drug information, is there a level of protection for drug info specialists or clinicians that utilize these information resources? So let me say they use a database or they find a piece of information, a study, and then they apply that to the patient, obviously with patient priority, right, and patient consent. But is there a level of protection where maybe something didn't go the way that it was intended or the way that it was thought to be? How does one kind of take ownership of that or feel protected aside from just normal, safety in terms of a hospital and ownership? But from that, who's not responsible? Who's responsible for maybe when things go astray? And they don't add up. Does that make sense?
No. Well, the reality is anybody can be named in a lawsuit.
Yeah.
Right. And that includes pharmacists and, particularly if you've provided incorrect information. I think, will that lawsuit prevail? Will it be dismissed? Will there be standing for it? All that kind of depends. But I think, there's a reason facilities have medical malpractice insurance and you're covered under that. But I also would say, having a process and documenting where you looked and what you found and documenting your interventions is something that people really kind of hate doing and tend to not want to do. But it's in 5 years or 2 years when a lawsuit comes to fruition, will you remember the day you misquoted a reference or that will you remember what you said at all? And I think no, because you didn't go into it thinking, well, I'm really screwing this up now. I should write this down. No, you, in your mind, you dispensed the drug correctly. You gave right information. You took into account everything you saw on that patient's chart. And, maybe you made an error and maybe it was idiosyncratic. There are times where things just go wrong. And I've certainly had that happen. But when it comes down to the legal process, if you didn't document it, it didn't happen.
Right.
And so I think there is some level of protection to say, this is what I said on that day. This is where I looked. This is where I found it. I verified and I validated it. That process that I teach in my class does offer as much protection as possible, but it doesn't. Everybody I know who's a physician has been sued at some point in their career, right? Has the plaintiff always won? No. But there are definitely, this is just a litigious society. And when people have an undesirable outcome, that's something that happens a lot. And so I think the way you protect yourself is documenting what you've done.
That makes sense.
And, maybe you don't document every single intervention, but certainly the ones where you're using literature in a way, it's gray literature. It's, you're extrapolating to a situation where it's this isn't exactly what the article says, but this is why we're doing it. And this is who I've discussed this with, and this is why we're doing it. But the more you document, the more, even the mundane things you do can actually have been done in error and you wouldn't know it because you didn't intend to create that error.
Right. It is a pain in the butt to document everything.
It is.
But it is important.
And then I think something that often gets overlooked in drug info is the way that the curriculum is structured here at the U. Some of your very first cases come from drug info.
Yeah.
We have these questions. There's this lady who's pregnant and she wants to know if she can take this over-the-counter supplement. And for the first semester of P1 year, you're not really getting that from all of the classes. So I think in that way, Drug Info was a really great exposure to clinical applications of didactic knowledge. And I did appreciate that. And I guess more generally, what do you think the future of pharmacy looks like?
Well, don't I wish I knew. I think this is the nice thing about the future is it's not fixed. Right? And all of us play a role in what the future of pharmacy looks like. And I think that's like, it's a cop-out answer in a way, but I think it's like, what do you want it to look like? And if pharmacists could kind of come to some agreement in some way, shape, or form about what it is we do, how we function in a team, that's what the future becomes. And if we sit by passively and we wait to see what happens, that's what it becomes, is whatever someone else decided it to be. So I think, a lot of it has to do with being involved and being aware of what's happening at a legislative level, being aware of issues in healthcare and thinking about like, how could this be solved in policy? How could this be solved with a different practice model? And, we always say like one of our missions here at the U is to train. Sorry, I also have children. To train.
We are children. We are children.
No, you're not. But you're like my grown-up children, right?
We are. This is true.
But how we're here to train leaders. We're here to train thought leaders. We are here to train the people who will decide the future of pharmacy. So for me to sit here and tell you what I think it is, which happened to me, there were many people who told me like what pharmacy was going to look like in 20 years, and I promise you, none of them were right. Actually, I mean, I was told at one point that like there
maybe
would be
in 20 more.
Maybe in 20 more, but like that there wouldn't be pharmacists dispensing, that robots would be doing all of it. And has that happened? No. I mean, yes, robots have been implemented, but not to the degree or extreme that people seem to think would happen, right?
This is true.
The really fundamental question that I always have with that is like, who is going to load the robot? Like,
the robot
who is going to make sure that the robot runs?
No, listen. There'll be a robot that loads a robot.
Well,
that loads
and
that robot.
And I've heard people tell me this, right? But it's like, who programs the decision support software?
A robot. We're all just robots. That's what basically that argument is saying, that I am not human, I'm a robot.
It almost like, I feel like the future some people envision, it feels a lot like that movie Wall-E.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm like, so do we also lose our bones at some point? Like, what do humans do when they cease creating and working? Like, how do we fill our time? How do we make money? I don't know. I think, but this sense of like inevitability that we'll all be replaced, I'm like, only if you create that.
It's kind of morbid thinking about that, listening to that just now. It's really morbid. Like, we're doomed. We're just going to be
We're not, but that's the
robots.
thing. It's the same, like, you hear all this economic, and I'm not an economist, but I'm like, well, the stock market only crashes if you guys freak out and pull your money out, right?
Yeah, this is true.
Like, you're the ones creating the economy. Like, all of us create the economy. And so, Winston Churchill's the only thing to fear is fear itself. That's true. We create these scary realities because we're afraid and we just let it happen.
Yeah.
Or we actively engage in our own self-sabotage.
This is true.
Well, I think it's time to stop beating around the bush then and ask the budding question.
Oh, yes.
Is artificial intelligence going to take over drug information?
It is such a timely question. You know why? Because yesterday I was talking with a colleague in EE about OpenAI, released this, what is it, Chat GT or something right? Mm-hmm. And it's like natural language processing, and it's like, this is going to just like, is this going to take knowledge-based jobs? And so I actually I was reading about it yesterday, and then I saw this question, and I was like, how funny. So fun side story, I'm creating an elective that I'm going to be rolling out, and I was like, well, let's just see if it makes a syllabus. So we entered like the sources I was going to use and kind of the point. And I'm like, I've got a video of, this is a radio thing, or whatever, podcast.
It does not.
Dating myself. But, it's like this video of it creating the syllabus. And I'm looking at it and I'm like, some of this is actually coherent. The objectives are coherent. The structure of the class is completely nonsensical, right? It's like topic from this author's book topic. It's same topic, next author. Instead of like we're gonna assimilate this. And so my thinking on AI is what we call intelligence. It's like, well, if in the definition of intelligence is something about, data assimilation, data collection and assimilation. So if in that regard, I think AI can replace a lot of what we do in terms of information gathering. But to date, and I don't know where AI is going, I don't see any creative, innovative, insightful production from it, right? It's not like it's offering you insight into a new way or insight into what the data actually mean. So my opinion at this point, and I could be wrong, I don't have a crystal ball, but I think it kind of depends on us, but like AI could have a role in taking some of those like really tedious, awful, like I hate making a syllabus.
Me too.
I hate the sections of a monograph that are just repeating the drug-drug interactions. And, there's things in my job that I'm like, ugh, I got to sit down and do this. I think AI could do a lot of those tasks and free us up to have ideas. Like, this is the research I want to do, and it facilitates the background and the research that you want to do. So to me, I don't think in any way, at least in its current state, and probably not for many years to come, will it replace thoughtful, insightful, creative people. I think if all you're offering is a repackaging of facts, then, you might be at risk of being replaced. But I think we could harness it to make ourselves a lot more efficient and to actually help burnout. Because if you think about burnout, it's like not always about having too much work to do. Sometimes it's about doing a lot of work that doesn't really fulfill you. And you're not interested in, and you're not passionate. And it also is a big source of errors when we're doing redundant work because our brain sort of shuts off. And I'm like, so think about the tasks you do on autopilot and AI could do those. And the tasks that, you really need to think, like sometimes, like you said, you can sit down and collect all this information, but what is important to that patient? And I still think, at least for the foreseeable future for me, it's a clinician who's going to be deciding that. But you could maybe have, a robot collecting it for you to look at and think about how much time that would save. So that's just kind of how I think about it. I don't think we're going to be replaced. And I do think, like, I've always had the question of like, so who programs the robot? Who
the robots?
Yeah, right. Like,
let me tell you, if robots are anything like my floor Roomba robot, that thing just bumps into the wall. I do not want anything to do with robots. It literally goes.
Well, and sometimes mine just stops in the middle of the floor and does a little circle and goes in a weird direction, and I'm like, you were
literally
to the
were
dust.
on the path. Yeah.
How is my house supermodel?
There is animal hair in your path, and you turn to avoid it.
Just watching them, sometimes you're like, what are you doing?
Yes,
and then it goes over your bar stools, and I'm like, I know I should pick them up, but what are you doing? And you hear, and then it turns red, and then it goes home, and you're like, oh, so when you're mad, you just go dock, but the rest of the house can be dirty. I can't with the thing.
I think we have a lot of work to do before we're replaced by robots. That's what I would say.
Seriously.
But I will say, I've read a lot of articles about it in the last couple of days because I am interested in it. And it's, this sense of humanities and these other sciences kind of have in a lot of ways refused to engage in a meaningful way with technology and have also failed to have the influence on the development of technology that would keep it ethical and, a sound product. And so to me, there has to come a point where we start working together to figure out, there's that question of like, we can do it, but should we?
Yeah.
And I think we have failed to answer that in a lot of cases with technology in our society.
Agreed.
And I love how you tried to use AI to make a syllabus, because some of my favorite things on the internet is like, we made an AI watch 1,000 hours of rom-coms, and then we asked it to make a rom-com script, right? And we find these things on these funny websites because like they're kind of coherent.
Yeah.
But mostly it's just hilarious.
Right. And I'll show you the syllabus because it's sort of like that. You're like, there's parts of it that you're like, well, this could be useful. And I think with some development, I don't know, I envision a future where I'm like, I don't write a syllabus. I don't program. Like, I don't do any of the boring work. I just am like, all these great ideas I have stored in my phone that I'm like, when I have time, I'll do that. I'll have time and I'll do that. That's...
Yeah, let's do the fun stuff.
Yeah.
But you know what? Let me tell you something. A syllabus in a student's eyes is like a contract. Even though you put an asterisk, this is not a contract and I am subject to change at any time. They come at you. Well, listen, you told me that I could get 1 point back after. I'm like, oh, this robot. And then you got to go have a conversation with the robot. And you're like, listen, dude, you're getting me in trouble over here. So it's very interesting. But I agree. If they can do the mundane stuff, the stuff that I don't have to waste energy on, that is very beneficial. And that's why people have assistants, because then they can go do the things that you don't want to waste the energy on. But then that also is kind of demoralizing to a human. Hey, go get me my coffee. But I don't got time to go get my coffee.
But it's also, most of us don't get assistants.
That's
you
true.
know? Like,
That's
I've
true.
never been offered someone to get me coffee. I have really...
Do kids count as assistants?
Oh, my son does make coffee now.
Yeah. Well, mine doesn't, but I'm going to train her how to do it.
It's like a life changer. He brings it into my room before I'm even up.
Wow.
I know.
How much do you have to pay him to get him to
Nothing.
do that? Wow.
He still believes in Santa Claus.
Okay, that's it.
But, he works for the nice list all year long.
That sounds good.
On his own. I don't have to threaten.
Mine just lost a tooth. We're still on Tooth Fairy. She's still just, Tooth Fairy came. Did you look at my dollars? I'm like, oh.
My dollars.
I have to say, as the older sibling, the best Christmas was when my younger brother still believed in Santa, but I didn't, because I think the big thing with Santa Claus is you've got to ask Santa for your biggest present, right? You got to dial that in.
But they can't leave you out. So I honestly think my daughter has stopped believing. Like, she's at least incredibly skeptical, but she's keeping it up for the sake. Like, she's sort of like still pretending, because she knows how it works, right? She's like...
Smart kid.
It's a really hard job, by the way. I mean, there's some things that they think about. I'm like, how am I supposed to do that?
Gosh.
I don't have a chimney.
Talk about Santa animal. I've come up with...
I've wasted so much powdered sugar and eaten half carrots.
Mm-hmm.
I can't... What do you do?
Reindeer food.
Yeah. I'm like, I can't. I'm keeping... Like, it's exhausting.
The best strategy when they ask you a question is, I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah. Oh, no.
How do you think?
Oh, no. Because your girl did that. And there was Tooth Fairy, and I had to have sprinkle trails. I had then had to have a toilet paper wall where it's like streamers coming down. I then had to have a tiny little trap because she wanted to catch her so she could give her a hug, but then release her. I'm like, how am I supposed to do that? What am I supposed to do?
Oh, no. I say things like, we couldn't catch Santa because... that's part of the mystery. And if you caught him, he'd probably be on the naughty list.
Oh, see, that's a good one.
Well, he's got other kids to see,
He
right?
does have other kids to see, and we wouldn't want to deprive them.
Oh, this is true.
You guys better be in bed, because if you're up, Santa won't stop here.
Ugh. I have a chimney now, so this guy ain't stopping anyway. What am I supposed to do? Leave the door open and freeze all night? That's what I did.
Santa's magic. Liz,
How do I teach that to a
come back
kid?
to magic.
Oh my God. I'm science. It's science. It's for science.
I don't know how he gets in. He just does.
I know. You know what? I just got to sometimes be a kid. I feel like sometimes my brain is just like survival. But anyway, I really wanted to say thank you for coming in and talking to us about your career and your life and giving us advice about, the evolution of pharmacy, because I think it is important that you can wear many hats, and that's okay. And it's okay to also be super ambitious and to not lose sight of that, because I feel like sometimes we do feel that we are not going to get to be what we want. It feels like we're just treading water when we're in school, and that there is light at the end of the tunnel. But this tread is what's teaching you a very important skill set and a set of skill sets. And that we don't spend the time to look at that in terms of how to effectively communicate or come to a resolution. We have no problem spelling all the problems,
Right.
but we don't ever have a resolution for those problems. And that's what takes the most time. And so I think that you sharing today about that has given insight. And, for those that are listening, it's really important to not always be proactive, but also to learn how to be reactive in a good way.
Well, and I would say my number one tip for anybody is, do not go to your boss with a problem if you do not have a solution. Even if it is not the solution that they're going to go with, like, have 2 to 3 things where you're like, I thought, maybe we could do this, maybe we could do that. But I think, like, you don't want to be the greasy wheel in the sense of, like, you never solve problems, but you raise lots of them.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think the other thing I'll tell you is what you want to do may change, and so being flexible and adaptable. It's great to be goal oriented, and it's great to have ideas about what you want to do, but it's also, like, don't be so focused on a target that there's all these opportunities that might be better, that you're like, you've got blinders on and you're heading somewhere and you've missed kind of the forest for the trees.
Yeah.
Right.
Or the journey for the destination.
This is true. Now, how do you maybe take that scope and maybe hone it in a little bit? Because your girl is full on circle of just looking at all of it. And sometimes I feel like I need to go in, but I guess that could be a topic for another day because I got too many things. I've got things with things, a list of things. They look at me like
a Pandora's box.
Seriously.
Well, I think part of that is like the timing and the experiences, and it's like it hones down little by, because there's like the idea of something and there's reality of something. And so, there might be like, wow, I really want to be a critical care pharmacist. And then you show up at 4 a.m. once and you're like, I'm never doing this again. Like it's sometimes it's like just living it. Like that's the beauty of 40% of the curriculum being experiential, is you have opportunity to be exposed to all these different areas. Mm-hmm. And every year someone is like totally blown away by what they are interested in. Like they thought they were heading one way, and then they do a rotation and they're like, I never even thought about this. And it's amazing and I love it and it's a fit. And so I think it's just being open-minded as you experience things, being flexible and realizing, you know what, you may have 10 things you want to do. And quite frankly, you may do them all in your career. It's entirely possible. You aren't going to do them all at once.
So we're not going to be taken over by robots, because I got a list. That's what that gives me
hope. The robots will leave you something to do. You will have a career, I promise.
Yep. Oh, programming the robots.
No way.
I'm kidding.
You should imagine my robots? They'd be insane. Nobody would want my pet robots. It'd be like the Roombas,
What is she even doing?
But that's all that I have for questions. Do you have anything else, Sierra?
I think we got to leave it with the mental image of the Roomba army. That was perfect.
If you know, you know. Seriously, I've had 2 Roombas, and they've never been better than one or the other. They're the same. They're almost just the same thing. Even at the 2.0 version, there's no upgrade.
To be fair, I have a shark bot.
Does it spit water out? Because I was about to get to that one, but then I saw it.
Well, I see how it vacuums.
There's a mop version.
And I'm like, I know.
I'm fearful of that now.
I feel like...
Could you imagine?
Given its skill in vacuuming, I don't trust it with water. That's where I'm at with my shark bot.
But on that note, we then again thank you so much for joining us, and we hope you had a fun time, because I know I did.
I did too.
Thank you
for asking me.
No problem. Bye.
This is the Farm Buds signing off.
Until next time, stay curious. The views, information, or opinions expressed during the Farm Buds podcast are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent those of the University of Utah. Farm Buds is not responsible for and does not verify the accuracy of any information contained in this series. This podcast does not constitute medical or other professional advice or services. The primary purpose of this show is to educate, inform, and allow those in the pharmacy profession to tell their stories.